of Education and Research at Human Life International. We're very blessed to have him. And so he's best known as author of the most exhaustive pro-life informational resource volume, The Facts of Life, and for his pro-life basic training course. Brian is the author of 9 books, over 90 scholarly and popular articles, and has travelled to 50 countries on 6 continents as a pro-life speaker, educator, and trainer. So he's compiled thousands of resources on one thumbnail drive, which is actually available to purchase at the shop, and it's to arm pro-lifers with the facts. So Brian and his wife Kathleen have 7 children and combined have over 50 years of pro-life experience, ranging from rescues, sidewalk counselling to counselling pregnant women and assisting in litigation against abortionists. So please put your hands together and help me to welcome.
Good morning, everyone. It's really, really wonderful for Kathy and I to be here with Father Bouquet, my boss from Human Life International, in Front Royal, Virginia, a small town which has the best and the worst of everything that the United States has to offer. Well, my wife and I were married 48 3/4 years ago, nearly 50 years. And one of the things we did when our first child was born, Aaron, in 1976, was we started writing down everything they did that was funny and cute. Because we knew by the time we got to this age of about 70, we'd have forgotten 99% of it. And so we have a 250-page book now, which is a real family treasure. And one of my favorites is when Kathy took our little daughter Rachel, when she was about 5 years old, to see the Sisters of Life at Christendom College give a presentation in Front Royal. And this young and beautiful sister was giving this presentation while Rachel sat on Kathy's lap. And at the end, the sister said, "Does anybody have any questions?" And our little girl blurted out, "Yes, where do babies come from?" And sister said, "You know, you should probably ask your mom when you get home." So, after driving home, she looked up at my wife with her beautiful blue eyes and said, "Okay, Mom, where do babies come from?" And my wife, Kathy, who's trained as a biologist, said, "Well, first you start with mommy's egg, and then you have to fertilize it." And Rachel says, "Oh, you have to use fertilizer?" So today I'd like to talk about transhumanism and all of the other transes that come under it. And Father Bouquet said this, the entire reason behind all of this, he gave us yesterday when he said transhumanism, transgenderism, and all the other transes come from a confusion about our relationship with God, and therefore a confusion about who we are and our dignity as human beings. We don't know who we are anymore. And so we're out there reaching out into all these strange corners where the devil is calling us to get completely confused and trapped. But now we see some real progress in turning back this insanity, beginning, believe it or not, in Europe, where many of these sports agencies are now saying, we're done with this transgender nonsense, women are getting hurt, women are getting cheated, and so we're going to not allow men, claiming to be women, to compete in women's sports. So there is still some hope. Now, I'd like to give you a little bit of background here on what I've found out. I've talked to a lot of people all over the world of all different kinds of disciplines, and a pattern begins to emerge. All right, let's take a look at what Pope St. John Paul II has said about the fundamental problem with what's happening in the world today. The development of technology and the development of contemporary civilization, which is marked by the ascendancy of technology, demand a proportional development of morality and ethics, which always seems to be left behind. Martin Luther King said exactly the same thing. Before we advance, we should have a fully developed morality and ethics, but yet we charge ahead in pursuit of our own desires and our own wants. The big problem, and my wife sees this every day at the Front Royal Pregnancy Center, is we make our life decisions and society makes its decisions based upon what goes on in our hearts, our feelings. We don't think about the holes we're going to fall into. And so Kathy sees these young ladies every single day. Some young man only has to say, I need you, baby. I want you, baby. I love you, baby, for all time. Gets her pregnant and then dumps her. And then she goes and has an abortion or has a single motherhood situation. And within a year, she's back in the same situation again. And the men love this kind of thing. We all say in the United States, the pro-choicers say, that abortion legalization was the greatest advance in women's rights of all time. But that's not true. It's the greatest advance in men's rights. Because all they have to do is get her pregnant, and the only obligation that they have is to give her $200 for half the cost of the abortion, and they're done with her. And we see that Gandhi's 7 deadly sins here: wealth without works, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality, and science without humanity. So what we have done is that we are pushing science as far as we possibly can, especially in areas like assisted reproduction, while not having any care for what the consequences might be. That is one of the characteristics, the 12 major characteristics of a culture of death that I describe on the thumb drive. Absolute short-sightedness. They have all of these programs that simply make the problem worse, and they're always shocked. And conservatives are saying, look, if you do this, you're going to wind up falling into this particular hole over here. And then they just call them, and well, you just hate these people. You don't want us to help them. And sure enough, what we predict happens, but you don't hear any apology because they're off on some other project. Such recently in Seattle, what used to be a beautiful city in the Pacific Northwest, in the state of Washington in the US, was a needle exchange program. So what they wanted to do was to make sure that Hep 3 and other diseases were not passed around by dirty needles. So back about 11 years ago, they started a needle exchange program where the addicts could get new needles. We warned them what this is going to happen is you're going to have a lot more addicts. And they said, that's ridiculous. There's no relationship between the number of addicts and whether or not you assist them into getting drugs and having safe injection sites. Within 6 years, there are triple the number of addicts. And the liberals are always shocked. The progressives are always shocked. We had no idea this could have happened. The attitude of many bioethicists and scientists, if it can be done, it must be done, and damn the consequences. Now, I'm going to tell you about the 4th worst thing that I've ever seen in it was about 38 years of pro-life activism now, in a few minutes here. But the general principle I'd like to talk about is exactly that here. Scientists have the right to exercise their professional activities to the limit as lay attitudes struggle to catch up with what the scientists can do. Bioethicist Paul Ramsey of the Hastings Center, where many of the ideas behind the culture of death are generated. We do well to heed Jeff Goldblum's words in Jurassic Park. Have all of you seen the first Jurassic Park movie? Where Jeff is sitting there, he says, yeah, talking about the generation of these dinosaurs from DNA. He says, well, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they never asked if they should. And these people are not asking if they should. They're just going ahead and doing it. They're so fascinated with their new toys. All of this goes back to eugenics. I have one of the biggest collection of old eugenics texts, I think, in the entire country in my office at Human Life International. And all of these eugenics texts are talking about the self-direction of human evolution. This is what eugenics is all about. Eugenics is a self-direction of human evolution. Like a tree, eugenics draws its materials from many sources and organizes them into harmonious entities. So what we're looking for is the Übermensch that the Nazis wanted. We've been looking for the Overman now, the Superman, Nietzsche's Superman, for more than 1,600 years. The paramount principle of transhumanism is eugenics, the ultimate expression of both positive and negative eugenics, self-directed evolution, which has been debated for many millennia, and we even hear Plato in the Republic of 380 BC If we're to keep our human stock at the highest pitch of excellence, there should be as many unions of the best of both sexes and as few of the inferior as possible, and only the offspring of the better union should be kept. Margaret Sanger and Marie Stopes, you've probably heard of both of them from the United States and from Great Britain. Both of them were hardcore eugenicists. And they always emphasized the breeding, quote unquote, like animals, of the better human beings and the elimination of those, or the keeping away of those, the segregation of those who are lesser human beings are considered. And usually it was almost entirely the white people who wound up as the superior ones. The darker you were, then the less human you were. And so we saw all of this kind of writing in the birth control news of Marie Stopes and the American Birth Control League, or Planned Parenthood's Birth Control Review. I have all of it on electronic format, and I've read every word, the 26 years of Margaret Sanger's Birth Control Review, a hardcore racist and eugenicist upon which the largest chain of abortion clinics in the country, in the United States, Planned Parenthood, is based. And most of these clinics are, of course, based in minority neighborhoods. So they're continuing the practice of negative eugenics as they go along. The three classes of eugenics, positive eugenics, ensure that the superior people and races breed with each other. The Lebensborn program in Nazi Germany from 1940 to 1944 was a program whereby the best of the Aryans were supposed to breed with each other to create the Superman. Negative eugenics, ensuring that inferior people and races do not perpetuate their kind through systematic contraception, sterilization, and abortion. This is the most easy type of eugenics. It's the most effective kind of eugenics, and we see many examples of this around the world today. A couple of years ago, Iceland was boasting that they had eliminated all Down syndrome's children through abortion. We don't have to worry about that particular class of people anymore, which betrays a distressing lack of knowledge about human biology. And then we see the abortion clinics, as I mentioned, in the United States and in many other countries, located in minority neighborhoods. Then we go back to 1974, NSSM 200, National Security Study Memorandum 200, which targeted people of color, or the black and the brown people of the world in many nations, to be suppressed by United States, United Nations, and European population control dollars. Look at Africa. 1/3 of Africans don't have clean water, and yet we spent more than $280 billion on suppressing their populations. I've been to medical clinics in several countries in Africa, beautiful, clean medical clinics, but they have no safe motherhood kits. They have no prenatal vitamins. They don't have any birthing kits, but they have pallets and pallets of Ciana Press injections, Depo-Provera. They have IUDs, they have birth control pills, everything you could possibly want to suppress the population. And there's an economic motivation behind this too, an economic motivation, because we're stealing their natural resources. And this is explicitly outlined in National Security Study Memorandum 200, or the Kissinger Report. If you look it up online, you can read it for yourself. The third form of eugenics, oddly enough, is reverse eugenics, deliberately ensuring or perpetuating that certain birth defects will continue to go down through humanity's line. This is one of these examples we found was a pair of lesbians in Virginia, our home state of lesbians, who came from what they call a deaf community. And so they got a couple of male friends to donate sperm. They were also deaf, so they could have a couple of babies who themselves were deaf. And so they're very proud of these little babies who are deliberately conceived and born to be deaf. They're like little trophies for these two women. They don't care about the difficulties these little kids are going to have throughout their lives because they're deaf. All they wanted was to have little reflections of themselves. So what they're doing is actually manipulating human genes in a rather crude way in order to come up with babies who are handicapped in a particular way. Fortunately, reverse eugenics is still pretty rare. The transhumanist view of humanity. We view human nature as a work in progress, a half-baked beginning that we can learn to remold as desirable ways. Current humanity need not be the end point of evolution. We hope that by responsible use of science, which always seems to be lacking, technology and other rational means will eventually manage to become post-human beings with vastly greater capabilities than present human beings have. In other words, God didn't do the job right. He didn't bake the cake enough. You know, the frosting is all messed up. The layers are sagging. So we're going to take God's cake here and we're going to improve it. We're going to fix it. We're going to come up with our own Übermensch. Now look at this in the comparison to the Christian view of man. What is man that you are mindful of him? Or the Son of Man that you care for him? You made him for a little while, a little lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subjection under his feet. We are a little less than the angels now. We are the paramount creation of man. Man is a glorious thing. Woman is a glorious thing. And we should be proud to be as God made us. And we find, especially in this particular area, when we try to improve ourselves in such a way as transhumanism, it always winds up in disaster. Imagine all the things that the transhumanists are proposing. They say it's inevitable, that you might as well not fight it because it's going to happen anyway. What's going to happen? You know, first they believe we came from the slime of the swamp, then monkeys, and then we are Neanderthals and wind up being modern man. What are we going to be next? Some of the visions are quite frightening. So we need to beware the humanist trap. As every single part of the culture of death does, they lie and deceive. Someone asked yesterday, what are the two most common anti-life or culture of death debating tactics? There's only one, and it's distraction or diversion. They want to cover up the truth. That's how you can tell something is evil. They want to cover up the truth. And you can tell something's good when you're trying to expose the truth and reveal it to the world. So these people are always using their little shovels to try to cover up the truth. And we're trying to use our shovels to expose the truth. The trouble is, these days they have much bigger shovels than we do. They can bury things much better than we can reveal them. So look at the transhumanist trap here. They say, well, it's transhumanism that if you lose your arm or your leg, it's replaced with a mechanical arm or leg. Well, it's not, because that's therapy. To replace an amputated or badly mangled limb with a prosthetic limb in order to restore a lost function. Transhumanism is different. It's to deliberately remove that limb or that organ and replace it with something that works better or is more stronger or faster than the original. The technology may be the same, but the intent is different. And that is the critical point. Intent. What is the intent? To replace what God made with something we think is better, or to restore what God has made? That's the difference between transhumanism and therapy. The short-term goals of transhumanism, extension of the human lifespan. Well, I'll tell you, a lot of us here in this room, if we were offered the opportunity to be 200 years old, I would say, get thee back, Satan, not a cotton-picking wind. Even if you gave me another 100 years of healthy life, you know, I could consider that for a while, maybe about a fifth of a second, and say, no, I've had enough of this, you know. As I used to joke around with my friend John Fusto, who used to work for HLI for many years, I long for the comfort of the grave, you know. Especially with a cough like this. Enhancement of mental and physical human abilities like positive eugenics, extracorporeal gestation. We've already had experimentations where we started with young little unborn babies, remove them from the wombs of their mothers, and raise them under high pressure, hypertonic solutions, hypernutrient solutions to 13 weeks, and then they perish. So there are ghastly experiments like this going on all over the place, especially in Eastern Europe. We want to try to grow babies beginning at conception all the way through to birth so that these rich women can avoid the possibility or all the problems of pregnancy, the physical problems of pregnancy. And we see a rather crude substitute for this by abusing poor women in India and other Asian countries through surrogacy. Elimination of birth defects, first by eliminating the afflicted, then by genetic engineering. As I said before, Iceland is now boasting that they have eliminated Down syndrome people completely. Why? It's not for the suffering of the kids, because studies have shown that Down syndrome children are the happiest group of people on earth. They're the most loved children on earth by not only their relatives, but their friends and family as well. So it's not because they're suffering, it's because other people suffer it. The culture of death suffer by just looking at them. The long-term goals of transhumanism, a sliding scale rights system. Now you know if transhumanism becomes a true reality as the way they want it to be, what's going to happen when they have these cyborg type people with all of these enhancements? You know, like RoboCop or something like that, where you can have arms that are 10 times stronger than the ones you have now, or organs that can go forever. You think everybody's going to be able to have that? No, it's going to be an elitist type of thing. It always is. When something evil comes down the road, the elite are always the ones who take advantage of it. 99% of us are going to wind up being what they call fleshists, or backwards people who insist upon remaining the way that God made us, while the 1%, of course, is going to be able to get away with whatever they want. We have natural limbs replaced with prosthetics, state-sponsored baby hatcheries, lab-generated human life only, which has been recommended by Time magazine, so we can get rid of all birth defects before the baby even starts to get to a point of 7 to 8 weeks. Parahumans or chimeras and cyborgs, chimeras or cyborgs, elimination of human individuality and sex, biotopia, a group mind or a singularity, and finally, the literal displacement or the replacement of God. So this is what they're dreaming of, that eventually we'll be a group mind. All of us will think exactly the same thing. Doesn't that sound like it's very charming? I mean, that sounds kind of boring to me. Now, believe it or not, this is the immortality bus, and it actually exists. Do you want to live forever? These weirdos drive this coffin-shaped bus all over the United States to try to gin up information or support for the presidential aspirations of their president, or the president of the Transhumanist Society. Actually, that's kind of cool. I bet there's a head turner there. That looks like a very roomy kind of recreational vehicle, but gee whiz, I'm not sure I want to drive around in a coffin. So the objective here, ultimately, is utopia as early as 2045. Now, it seems like a lot of utopias we've tried to have in this world of ours have wound up in nothing but mass death. So they're going to try again. They didn't do it right. So they're just going to adjust the system a little bit more. It's like communism and socialism. Yeah, we killed 100 million people, but you know, those are just necessary sacrifices which always have to be made by someone else. All we have to do is adjust things a little bit and things will be all right. Time says 2045 is the year that human beings attain immortality. These guys are as bad at predictions as the environmentalists. I have a list of about 75 environmental predictions, and every single one of them are completely wrong. Because by now, the year 2023, Micronesia would have completely disappeared. the oceans would have raised more than 150 meters by now. That didn't happen. And you can tell something's bogus when the climate change activists like Barack Obama and Al Gore buy these enormous beachfront mansions. You know, $15 million mansions right on the ocean shore. And then they're screaming, we're all going to drown because all of these giant icebergs are going to break away and they're going to raise the level of the water 50 meters in the next 50 years. Well, why are they buying these huge mansions? Why aren't they on some mountain peak somewhere? Here and now, Homo sapiens is in the process of becoming Homo biologicus, or Homo superior, a strange biped that will combine the properties of self-reproduction without males. Oh, doesn't it sound like fun? Like the green fly, of fertilizing his female at long distance. Oh my, that brings some unwanted visions. Like the nautiloid mollusk, of changing sex like the xyphors, or growing from cuttings like the earthworms, or replacing his missing parts like the newt, of developing outside his mother's body like the kangaroo, and of hibernating like the hedgehog. Well, that last one I've been doing myself for the last several days. After getting this awful cold after visiting Milford Sound, what a beautiful place. But I would definitely undergo 5 days of misery to do that again. It's reasonable to ask whether there'll be a family at all. Given the propensity for divorce, the growing number of adults who choose to remain single, declining popularity of having children, the evaporation of the time families spend together, another way may eventually evolve and may be quicker and more efficient to dispose with family-based reproduction. Society could then produce its future generations in institutions that might resemble state-sponsored baby hatcheries. Time magazine more than 30 years ago. Now, one of the things I've learned in all my travels is the happiest people in the world are the ones who live by Catholic teachings, because we live by the natural law. As Father Marx, the founder of HLI, used to say, God always forgives, man sometimes forgives, nature never forgives. You go against Mother Nature, she's mean. She is going to bite you back, and she's going to bite you hard. Now, this is oddly enough true. I have known atheists who are better Catholics than most American Catholics. And they're happier than most American Catholics because they live by the natural law. Can you imagine? I knew in Portland, Oregon, when I worked for the Army there in the Corps of Engineers, 2 atheist guys who were against contraception, against abortion and homosexuality. They're happily married, very happy people. And they went entirely logically by the natural law. This is not a religious thing, this is a logic thing. Everything that the church teaches, particularly in the area of sexual morality, is supported by reams of science, especially the General Social Survey in the United States, which has been carried out for the past 55 years. Every single year, these researchers go out and they interview people of every kind of so-called family, the actual family and every other kind of family, single people, people living together, polygamists, all the rest of it. And they find over and over again that the 3 most reliable indicators of happiness are people who are married, who are religious, and come from an intact family with a mother and a father. Those are always the most happy people. And so science supports us all the way. Animals, including humans, will be granted rights based on varying degrees of personhood. When African gray parrots, gorillas, and dolphins have the same rights as a human toddler, a transhuman-friendly rights system will be in place. Leon Cass and others say that if you have an IQ of less than 70, you're less than a gray parrot on the right scale. That gray parrot or that gorilla who have their full capabilities, even though they don't have as high of an IQ as that, are above you in the transhuman rights scale. If the greatest good of the greatest number, or the social good, were served by it, it would be justifiable not only to specialized capacities of people by cloning or by constructive genetic engineering, but also to bioengineer or biodesign parahumans or modified men is chimeras, part animals, chimeras, or cyborg androids, part prosthesis. Now here's my favorite bioethicist, Joseph Fletcher. I'd vote for cloning top-grade soldiers and scientists if they are needed to offset an elitist tyrannical power plot. I would favor making and using man-machine hybrids rather than genetically design people for dull, unrewarding, or dangerous roles needed for nonetheless the community's welfare, perhaps a testing of suspected pollution areas or the investigation of threatening volcanoes or snowslides. So we see ourselves sliding back into this idea that there are lesser humans. We're also going back to segregation in the United States. Now we have special black college ceremonies, and many colleges across the United States, now 30, will have separate black graduation ceremonies. We're going back to segregation because the current Marxist system knows that they can only get away with something if they divide us among ourselves. So we have to work together against the culture of death. That's one of the 6 primary strategies of the devil, and they all start with D, one of them being distraction, as I already said, this one being division. James Watson, Nobel Prize winner, the discoverer of DNA. If you're really stupid, I'd call that a disease. The lower 10% who really have difficulty, even in elementary school, what's the cause of it? A lot of people like to say, well, poverty, things like that. It probably isn't. So I'd like to get rid of that 10% to help the lower 10% by killing them. The only problem with that is if we do that 2 or 3 times, there won't be any more Democrats left to vote for these culture of death policies. People say it would be terrible if we made all girls pretty. I think it would be great. This is how these people think, Let's get rid of all the variety and make everybody look the same. The transhumanist movement has been in existence now for more than 200 years, and they're big. They have worldwide conferences, they have glossy magazines, they have well-organized NGOs who are pushing their kind of philosophy on the world. You have Nanotechnology Now, Transtopia, Wired magazine, the Longevity Project, many, many other projects and institutes. You have all kinds of think tanks out there who are all linked together. A very powerful multi-billion-dollar movement. We see it sipping into our lives all the time now. Genius Asian egg donor needed to help build our family. $35,000 compensation. We're just a family seeking your help. Please help us. The transhumanist incrementalism. We started out with, I want a baby. I can't have a baby, so I want a baby. So we started with artificial reproduction. IVF, in vitro fertilization, is now more than 100 years old. I want a healthy baby. So we have IVF baby, and if that baby is somehow handicapped, we get rid of it through abortion and just try again. Next, I want to select my baby's sex. Now we're up to the point where I want a perfect baby, CRISPR. CRISPR is clustered, regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. I have no idea what that means. If anybody here can explain it to me, I'd really appreciate it. It's nightmarishly, as according to my wife, complex. So I want a perfect baby, I want a gene-edited baby, I want a baby just like me, cloning. I want a super baby made to order, high intelligence, athletic, artistic ability, etc., positive eugenics, and transhumanism. So this is what they are actually saying in their magazines. We want to have an entire world of perfect human beings. The problem is the culture of death always neglects the soul. According to Mark 12:30, you will love the Lord your God with all your body, mind, heart, and soul. Body, mind, heart, and soul are the 4 elements of the human being. Animals have bodies, they have minds, and they have hearts, but they don't have souls. The culture of death always neglects the soul, and so it sees us as a bunch of animals. And so all of this begins to make more sense if we're just another animal. There's no problem with breeding a new different type of animal, a better kind of animal. You know, my wife and I have a cat, a Bombay cat, an enormous black thing, just a beautiful cat, very affectionate. She follows you everywhere. This kind of cat didn't exist 25 years ago. But we're sure glad they exist now because they're absolutely gorgeous and friendly cats. But we don't want to do that with human beings because we have souls. God made us this way. We're supposed to overcome our own handicaps for His greater glory. If transhumanism becomes a new normal, a new genetic underclass, the fleshists will be created. Human individuality will simply cease. The value of human life would become relative, not intrinsic or utilitarianism here. Your value will be determined by what you can do. As with all utopian movements that gain power, transhumanism would quickly become strictly authoritarian. It's impossible to avoid the human lust for power and control. Evil people tend to cluster together. Unfortunately, we, hopefully good people, tend to not cluster together quite as strongly, and so we're weaker for it. God's plan is simple. Man and woman in a mutually exclusive, indissoluble marriage, open to children. It's as simple as that. This is what the culture of death wants. Have you noticed they always try to make things so complicated that we regular people couldn't possibly understand it? So we have to make way, shut up, sit down, and let them, the experts, take care of things for us. So this is why you hear about things like intersectionality. Everything is all tied together, and you need to have 2 PhDs in order to be able to understand it, 3 PhDs to be able to explain it, and none of it makes any sense. It's all complete gibberish. Now, this has gone to rather amusing lengths. Back in 1999, there was a movie put out called the J2 Project, where this guy in Austria claimed to have cloned Jesus. There was an entire complete story behind this where somehow they found some blood on a sandal and then they did the old Jurassic Park trick. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner there's J2, the new Jesus, who was disgusted by the entire whole thing and said, I'm just going to go into retirement right now. Apparently, they don't realize that divinity is not a genetic trait. The whole thing turned out to be a hoax, but it was amusing to watch everybody lose their minds. A very well done hoax. So you can look it up online. I'd recommend watching it because first it's shocking and then it's hilarious. Remember this place, Kathy? In 2005, well, before this, I had heard from 2 Ukrainian medical doctors that there were some children's hospitals, or mothers' hospitals as they call them, in Kiev in Ukraine, where hundreds of babies were disappearing. These are newborn babies, not aborted babies, hundreds of newborn babies. And so these doctors went to investigate what's going on there, and the government attempted to assassinate them. So they fled and got asylum in the southern part of Ireland. And so I went to interview them there and got a story that shocked me right to my core. Apparently, they're killing these babies in Ukraine, ransacking their organs, and then shipping them to this place called the Institute for Reproductive Medicine in the highlands of Barbados in the Caribbean, and injecting rich women, primarily from North America and England, claiming that they could solve any kind of disease. You have dry skin. That's what I claimed. I've got dry skin. When we went to visit them, they said, oh yes, we'll just give you a $15,000 injection. It will cure it. What if you have cancer? AIDS? Oh yes, that's all cured. This was run by a Ukrainian proctologist named Yuli Baltaitis. Now we know where he gets his ideas from, but this guy is millions of dollars by having these baby organs shipped in, liquefied, and injected into these women. Now, this is the entirety of the facilities he had there. But he made something like $7 million in 3 years. A lot of his patients got all kinds of very severe neurological disorders after being injected randomly with these cells. You know about that, doctor, yeah? And apparently he was eventually shut down because we went to the BBC, of all people, and exposed this. They did an expose on this guy, and he was thrown out of Barbados. But then he went to Hungary and opened up the same kind of place, and eventually he was jailed. So my point by showing you this is, it doesn't matter what horrifying things we hear about, there are things 10 times worse going on in places we don't hear about. There are no limits to the culture of death's greed. Okay, you think transhumanism is not bizarre enough for you? It gets even nuttier. How about transspeciesism? This guy thinks he's a parrot. Ted Richards. He spent tens of thousands of dollars making himself look like a parrot. But the inside of his head is even stranger than the outside. He actually believes he's a parrot and demands that people treat him like one. So you think you've got a big old hairy guy wearing a dress demanding to be called ma'am? I mean, you go ahead and look stupid if you want to. That's fine, that's your right, you know, if you think it is, but you don't have the right to demand that I share in your delusions. Here's a guy who thinks he's a cat. Dennis Abner believes he's a cat. He's had his teeth filed to points and even eats cat food. He meows too. But he doesn't rub up against her, I hope, and starts purring. This is a kind of mental illness that is out on the streets now. In 1962, when President Kennedy was the President of the United States, we had 545,000 people being cared for in homes for the mentally ill. 545,000. But then the American Civil Liberties Union and other groups filed suits saying they're violating their rights by keeping them off the streets. You know how many people we have in mental institutions now? Less than 40,000. So the population has dropped by more than 90%, and that's why our streets are flooded with addicts, the mentally ill, causing all kinds of problems. And the worst thing is, they're not getting the care they need. We like lizards, right? Look at this guy here. Eric Sprague had his entire body altered and dyed so he could look like some kind of lizard. We don't know if he eats crickets. At least he won't be offended if we say he speaks with a forked tongue. Dragonkin. I'm the dragon lady, a pre-op M2F, male to female transgender in the process of morphing into a human dragon, becoming a reptoid as I shed my human skin and my physical appearance in my life as a whole, leaving my humanness behind. As bizarre as this is, how is this different from transgenderism or anybody who turns away from the will of God? This is confusion as to who we are and what our human dignity is, and tremendous confusion as to what our relationship is with God. This is Came Mortis, the devil man of Colombia. He was disowned by his devout Catholic family and can't understand why. Can you imagine approaching communion looking like that? Then we have transableism, the desire or the need of a person identified as able-bodied by other people to transform his or her body to obtain a physical impairment. The person could want to become deaf, blind, amputee, or paraplegic. Once again, confusion as to who we are. This requires mental treatment. This does not require having body parts be amputated. These people need care. That's the permanent solution. They need care and they need companionship. And here's a lady who married a train station. A new kind of relationship. There's plenty more enabling the mentally ill out there. One California woman married a train station, changed her name to Carol Santa Fe. The train station will never cheat on her. Can we all agree this is real love, or that she is newborn that way as a train sexual? Now here's a guy who's married to his car. This is a mechanophile. The stickers are not jokes, it says. And it says, I find tailpipes sexy. Rev your engine, I like it. Cars are people too. My car is my lover. I like my car too, but gee whiz, that's going a little bit far. Cars, trucks, aircraft, watercraft, locomotives, heavy machinery, they're all people too, T-O. With genders, with feelings, with emotions, with visual eyesight, with the ability to hear, with the ability of independent thought, the ability to feel physically, with opinions, with sexual interests, with every other capability as human people. Machine people are indeed alive. Most people don't see that because they aren't smart. You know, gee, that kind of makes me feel bad. Or they're, T-H-E-R-E, brainwashed. They have the ability to reproduce themselves with a human partner, meaning automobiles can themselves give birth. Well, I've been watching our Subaru. It was 13 years old now. I guess that's about the age when you can have a baby. But I haven't noticed a trunk swelling or the little Subarus scattered around in the street or anything like that. This is a vehicle identification number that he has engraved on his arm. Now, this poor guy, he's obviously a little bit missing a few pistons here, but once again, these people need treatment, for crying out loud. It's all a continuum. It all looks crazy and it can all be laughed at, but it's all essentially the same thing. Confusion about who we are in our relationship to God. Surely things can't get any worse. This used to be my slogan, but it can always get worse. It all comes down to pro-life or anti-life. Pro-life, the natural way babies come from sex. Anti-life, non-natural, sex without babies and babies without sex. All of this stuff is simple. Don't listen to the people who talk about intersectionality, or there are centuries of all kinds of odd religious rituals in other countries that support our view. Is it good for the human person and dignity, or is it not? Does it fulfill the cardinal virtue of justice to give God and our neighbor what is due to them, or is it not? Is it just? Is it good for the person? All you have to do is ask those questions, and nobody will be able to escape those questions. Recommended reading, all of these different documents are on the thumb drive. Donum Vitae on certain bioethical questions, which gives you the 5 criteria for illicit assisted reproduction procedure. Dignitas Personae, Humanae Vitae. My daughter, or our daughter, Rachel, was married on Humanae Vitae Day 3 years ago, and Father was one of the 3 priests officiating. We're very grateful for that. Familiaris Consortio, The Truth and Meaning of Human Sexuality, Evangelium Vitae, and my favorite, the 1907 encyclical by Pope St. Pius X, Pascendi Dominici Gregis, on the doctrine of the modernists. This is a very fun to read encyclical because it reads like it was written yesterday, how they're undermining the doctrine of the church. And this very, very perceptive, very prophetic Pope tells us everything that's going on in the world today. So I'd highly recommend it. It's a fun read. So as a final slide here, I'd like to say, little baby here, keep up the great work. And if anybody would like to contact me, I have a few business cards here.